Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. This is a short sample video for the APC Super Summary series. And in this particular video, we're going to cover Porter's diamond model. The first thing I'm going to do is take you through a brief content summary. We'll start with just a fix on how Porter's diamond fits into the overall scheme of things within CIMA E2. I'll take you through a little bit of background on Michael Porter and why you should listen to him. We'll move on to the model itself and an explanation of the theory. Then we'll deal with a real-life example, which in our case is the German car industry. From then we'll move on to two practice MCQ questions, and it's important within your studies obviously that you'll practice MCQ questions as often as possible and apply your knowledge. And finally I'll just summarize and recap on what we've done. So in terms of an introduction, really what your CIMA E2 examiner is trying to do is to get you to understand what this holistic view of strategic management means. And essentially what it means is that you look at all aspects of management and how really management assess the competitive environment. And essentially what they do is that they use a series of models, of which one is Porter's diamond. It's certainly a core model to your CIMA E-stream studies, E2 and indeed E3, and it's important that you understand it and really apply your knowledge to real life examples, real life situations, and that's how you'll get a deeper level understanding. Now, in terms of Michael Porter and his background, well, really when Michael Porter speaks, people listen. He is a leading authority on competitive strategy in the competitive environment. His background is within Harvard Business School. The key book that he's written over the last sort of 30 years that's been rewritten many times is The Competitive Advantage of Nations. And within that book, he details how businesses should look at the competitive environment and how they should analyze it. And this model, and indeed the book itself, is central to your E-stream studies. Certainly an examiner favorite. Certainly don't walk into the exam without having a good feel for everything that Michael Porter says, including the other areas outside of the Porter's diamond, Porter's 5 forces, and indeed the value chain. In terms of the diamond model itself, I've got 4 key areas for you here. And it's important, as I've said, that you understand the mechanics of the model and indeed its limitations and indeed how it applies to real life. In terms of a definition of the model, key points really is that Michael Porter is saying or trying to explain how certain nations achieve some sort of comparative competitive advantage over other nations. In other words, why is it that a particular nation, for example Germany, has so many excellent premium car brands? And really what we're saying then is that there are a series of factors that have come together over the last, say, 100 years or thereabouts to give the German car industry a competitive edge over neighboring nations and indeed worldwide. In terms of the constituent elements of the model, you'll see, and I'll explain these over the course of the next few slides, there are a series of factors, factor conditions, related and supporting industries, demand conditions, and firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. And this is obviously in the form of a diamond. You'll see from this model that essentially what we're saying is that all of these factors come together. And it's important for us within our studies to understand, what do they mean? What do these factors mean? So, in terms of the first area, factor conditions, really what we're saying there is that there are a set of basic and indeed advanced factor conditions, sometimes referred to as endowments or inputs of production, that are in play within particular countries to give them what we call comparative advantage or indeed comparative competitive advantage. So in terms of the basic factors, they're really naturally occurring. Climate, weather, perhaps basic resources such as iron ore or steel, and indeed unskilled labor. In terms of the advanced factors, I'd ask you to remember that these are man-made. So really what we're talking about is know-how, technical or scientific knowledge, perhaps transport infrastructure, roads or rail network, and indeed telecommunications. So key points here for us are that the factors are split into 2, basic versus advanced. One naturally occurring and the second really man-made. Moving on from there, in terms of the related and supporting industries, really the key thing here is really the development of a series of connected or mutually supportive industries. In essence, what we're saying is that success drives success. Where we have what we call clusters of related industries really providing each other with mutual support, you'll see, and if you can imagine the German car industry going back many years to the 1920s or thereabouts, is that there were clusters of industries that were perhaps related to the aircraft industry that were sort of ready-made. And so when we got to the 1920s, the 1930s, and the influx of the Nazi Party in Germany, you'll see that really these strong home suppliers made the industry more robust. So keyword there is clusters, and really the idea that they derive strength from their links. Moving on from there, in terms of the demand conditions, one key problem here that I've seen students make, or key issue for them, is assuming that by demand conditions we simply mean a large demand. And certainly a demand is important, preferably a large one, but it's really what the businesses learn from their consumers. In other words, it's the sophistication of the demand that's so important. And as you'd imagine, sophistication of the consumer will drive innovation, therefore driving up the quality of the product. So really for me, the key word there is it's the sophistication. It's really what management and these businesses learn from their consumers that's important, not just the size of the demand, though obviously, as you appreciate, we do need a reasonably sizable demand. Last one here. Fourth element of the diamond, firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. A little bit more difficult perhaps for students to understand. But essentially what I would say here is that, how do these firms do business? And what was it within the company's or the nation's culture, indeed their style of management, that helped the industry to develop? I mean, certainly Germans are known for their interest in the technical side and their technical expertise. And really their strategy with the car industry going back 100 years was really about quality. So everything for them was about driving up quality. And as you would imagine, the number of excellent premium brands for cars within Germany, the quality drove the business. In terms of the way that firms are structured, really, we're talking there about, how easy it was for firms to develop, how easy it was for firms to make decisions, or perhaps even access capital. And then obviously rivalry is sort of self-explanatory. The better the rivalry, the more the rivalry, the better it is for the industry. So in terms of the limitations, quite a few, and this model is often criticized. One key point is that it was developed in the 1980s, and you'll appreciate that the business landscape was completely different then than it is now. No internet, for example. Over and above that, Porter doesn't really describe very well the impact upon businesses of government intervention, or indeed lack of it. The role of government is certainly underplayed within the model. And if you can imagine that any government can have a significant impact upon the development of a particular industry, for example by applying or providing subsidies to that industry, thus aiding its growth. Other than that, I guess linked into point one is just this idea that multinational companies may not be overly bothered about factors or input of production within a particular country if they're looking to expand. It may well be that they bring their expertise and their know-how with them, and therefore, does Porter's diamond really impact upon an MNC? Perhaps not. In terms of a summary, you'll see the model relayed there for you. I think the only point that Homer is asking us to relay back to you is that, Porter does mention government. He does say, well, do think about government. It's not core to the model. He also mentions something called chance events, literally luck. And really what we're saying there is that these factors outside of the four above can have an impact. So really, government intervention or lack of it, and indeed luck, can play a part. And Porter does mention them, but sort of plays them down a little bit. Now, in terms of the real-life example, I've already referred to Germany, and all I've done within this slide is just pick out one or two areas. And if you imagine geographically, Germany does have an advantage. It's central to Europe, very, very easy to export products, indeed cars, to other neighbouring countries. Over and above that, certainly the gearing towards technical know-how was essential to the development of the German car industry. In terms of natural resources and indeed businesses that were related, if you imagine moving from the World War I through to the Second World War, Germany is blessed with iron ore and steel industries and those resources. So really, as you can imagine, that there was a certain amount of cooperation between component suppliers, and clusters or pockets of little businesses that helped each other, provided mutual support, and thus aided the development of the industry. In terms of the demand, I'll ask you to note that production of cars in Germany in the 1930s went up from 30k to 350, quite a significant increase. There was a high demand, and indeed, there was a sophisticated demand. In terms of the strategy and structure and rivalry, the strategy, as mentioned, was all about quality, and you only have to look at the models that I've picked out below here for you in terms of German car brands to see that Germany is, and indeed was, a highly geared and highly intense car manufacturer. In terms of the practice MCQs, just give you a sort of an intro to this. Really, the best way to approach passing any exam is to pick apart the mechanics of questions. And really that's what I've done here. Really, I'll show you the question first. On the next page, you'll see my breakdown of how the question works. In this particular one, you'll see that really what we're looking to do is to split these 4 items between advanced and basic. And hopefully you remember my comments in relation to this particular area of the diamond in terms of man-made versus naturally occurring. So if we look at the breakdown of the question, we're really asked to split them down between basic and advanced. We've certainly got to rote learn each element. In this particular case, we're looking at simply these factors. There are 4 of them. How can we split these between basic and advanced? And the key rule for you to remember here is that basic are naturally occurring and advanced are man-made. And if you can remember that, it's quite easy really to split these up. Clearly, the only one that is naturally occurring is the coastline and the river system. That has to be B. All of the others are man-made, certainly the education system, comms, and indeed the road and rail. Okay. Moving on from this question number 2, probably a little bit easier. It's talking about the leather footwear industry, and what it looks to be is some related industries, the leather working and indeed the design. And what they've mentioned here in the question is that, that there's some sort of benefit from one to t'other. And really what you're asked to do is just to pinpoint which area of the diamond. So I see this as quite a low-level question. Hopefully we can pick up some marks here fairly easily. In terms of the breakdown, I've asked you simply to remember clusters. Where we see a series of different industries, we must think, well, they're obviously related in some ways. Certainly footwear derives from working leather and indeed some form of design. So clearly A is the answer here. And remember that phrase, mutual support and indeed cooperation. One just key point here, just to remember, the idea of proximity of suppliers. Where suppliers are local to a business, it's a lot easier to deal with them. And certainly these suppliers, I would suspect, are very local to the producer of the footwear itself. Okay. In terms of a summary here, hope it's been helpful to you. I've just got really 5 key points for you. The first one is that Porter's Diamond is clearly about competitive advantage. What does that mean? That means some sort of edge over your competitors. How do you get that? What Porter says within this diamond model is that there are a series of determinants or elements. We have to learn them. Each of those areas of the diamond are important. You must rote learn them. Do also remember that buzzwords are key. If it's a case study exam, you've got to use that word, clusters, or perhaps sophistication of demand. Do try to apply these models to real life. That's important, and you'll get a much deeper level understanding by applying knowledge rather than just some rote learning. Rote learning is the first part, application is the second part. And how you're going to do that, obviously, is a lot of question practice. That's the key to passing any exam. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you found this particular short sample helpful, and good luck with your studies. Many thanks.